He used to chase cartel boats 200 miles offshore at midnight, armed with Coast Guard cutters and federal authority. Now he taught tourists how to catch red snapper from his charter boat in Key West, just wanting a peaceful retirement after 30 years of drug interdiction operations. Captain Ray "Salty" Donovan thought those days were behind him. He'd traded his Coast Guard Commandant uniform for a fishing captain's weathered polo shirt, his federal badge for a Florida fishing license, his military precision for the laid-back rhythm of island life. But this morning, 4 customers climbed aboard his boat, Sea Angel, and everything about them screamed cartel. The way they moved, the weight of their bags, the nervous glances at GPS coordinates instead of fishing spots. Ray had spent 3 decades learning to read these signs. And now, 15 miles offshore in the Gulf Stream, he was about to discover that retirement doesn't always mean the mission is over. Welcome to Echo Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Key West, Florida. The southernmost point of the continental United States, where Caribbean culture meets American fishing tradition. At Garrison Bight Marina, among dozens of charter boats, sat the Sea Angel, a 32-foot sport fishing boat that had seen better days but was meticulously maintained. Captain Ray Donovan, 62 years old, had owned and operated Sea Angel for 15 years. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he'd arrive at the marina, check his equipment, study weather patterns, and prepare for another day of taking tourists fishing in the crystal-clear waters around Key West. Ray was what locals called true Key West, weathered by sun and salt, speaking with the slow drawl of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. His customers knew him as a skilled captain who could find fish when others couldn't, a man who told good stories but never bragged about his past. Former Coast Guard was all he'd say if anyone asked. He never mentioned the rank, never talked about the operations, never revealed that he'd been Commandant of the 7th Coast Guard District, responsible for drug interdiction across the entire Caribbean basin. For Ray, those days were supposed to be over. The Sea Angel was his sanctuary, fishing was his therapy, and the simple pleasure of helping tourists catch their first mahi-mahi was enough excitement for a man who had spent 30 years in high-stakes operations. This Tuesday morning seemed like any other. At 6:45 a.m., 4 men approached the Sea Angel. They had booked a full-day deep-sea fishing charter through the marina office, 8 hours, lunch included, targeting whatever was biting in the Gulf Stream. Ray studied them as they approached. 30 years of reading people had become second nature. The leader introduced himself as Carlos, well-dressed, confident, but his eyes never stopped moving. Behind him, 3 younger men, Miguel, Diego, and Santos. They carried expensive fishing gear that looked brand new, still had price tags on some items. "Morning, gentlemen," Ray greeted them. "You ever been deep-sea fishing before?" Yes," Carlos replied, his accent slight but noticeable. "We are very excited for the fish." Ray nodded, but internal alarms were already sounding. Their gear was too new, their enthusiasm felt forced, and most telling, they were more interested in the boat's electronics and fuel capacity than the fishing equipment. "Where are you folks from?" Ray asked casually as he untied the dock lines. "Miami," Carlos answered quickly. "Business trip. Thought we would try the fishing." Ray fired up the twin engines and guided Sea Angel out of the marina. Normal charter customers were usually excited, asking questions, taking photos. These 4 sat quietly, occasionally speaking to each other in rapid Spanish that they stopped whenever Ray came near. 30 minutes out, Ray was setting up fishing lines when he noticed Diego wasn't watching the rods. He was studying Ray's GPS system and marine radio. "Nice electronics," Diego commented. "This boat can go far offshore?" "Far enough," Ray replied. "We'll be fishing about 15 miles out today. Good current out there. What if we wanted to go further? Maybe 40, 50 miles." Ray's antenna went up. Tourists didn't ask about long-distance capability. Drug runners did. "Fuel wouldn't last," Ray said simply. "We'll find plenty of fish where we're going." But Carlos stepped forward. "We pay extra for more fuel. Want to go to special fishing spot?" "What special spot?" Carlos pulled out a GPS device with coordinates already programmed. Friend told us about this place, very good for big fish. Ray glanced at the coordinates. 24 degrees, 47 minutes north, 81 degrees, 23 minutes west. That position was 60 miles southwest of Key West, in deep water near the Tortugas. It was also a known drug transshipment area. That's a long run, Ray said. We'd need to leave now to have any fishing time. Perfect, Carlos smiled. We go now. Ray made a decision. Instead of refusing and potentially alerting them to his suspicions, he'd play along and gather intelligence. 30 years of Coast Guard operations had taught him that the best way to understand criminal activity was to observe it from the inside. All right, but it'll cost extra for fuel, Ray said, and we'll need to monitor weather carefully out there. As they headed southwest into deeper water, Ray used the time to study his passengers more carefully. Miguel was nervous, constantly checking his phone despite being out of cell range. Santos kept looking back toward Key West, as if watching for pursuit. Diego continued examining the boat's capabilities, but it was Carlos who worried Ray most. He moved with the confidence of someone in command, someone used to being obeyed, and every few minutes he checked an expensive diving watch, not for time, but as if waiting for a specific moment. 2 hours out, they reached the coordinates. Ray began setting up fishing lines, but Carlos stopped him. Actually, Captain, we just wait here for a little while. Friend is coming to meet us. There it was. Ray's 30 years of experience crystallized into certainty. This was a drug transfer operation, and they'd just made him an unwitting accomplice. What kind of friend? Ray asked, keeping his voice neutral. Fishing friend. He has different boat. We share fishing spots. Ray nodded, but his mind was racing. He was 60 miles from shore with 4 cartel members who might not let him return if they suspected he knew their real purpose. The Sea Angel carried emergency equipment, but no weapons. He'd given up that life when he retired, or so he'd thought. 20 minutes later, a go-fast boat appeared on the horizon. Ray recognized the type immediately. Twin outboard engines, low profile, built for speed and stealth, the same kind of boat he'd chased for 3 decades. As it approached, Carlos and his men became more animated, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Ray caught enough to understand. This was a drug transfer, probably cocaine from Colombia being moved to distribution points in Florida. The go-fast boat pulled alongside. 2 men aboard, neither speaking English. They had waterproof packages wrapped in plastic, the universal signature of maritime drug smuggling. Captain, Carlos said, his tone now completely different, no longer friendly tourist but commanding criminal. You will help us move packages to your boat. Ray faced a choice. Play along and become a drug smuggler, or reveal who he really was and face the consequences. I don't think so, Ray said quietly. Miguel pulled a pistol from his tackle box. I think you do. Ray looked at the 4 men, the drugs, the weapons. For a moment, he was 35 years old again, boarding suspect vessels in rough seas, commanding operations that saved lives and prevented tons of narcotics from reaching American streets. Gentlemen, Ray said, his voice carrying new authority, you've made a serious mistake. Carlos laughed. What mistake, old fisherman? You chose the wrong boat. Ray moved faster than any 62-year-old should have been able to. 30 years of boarding operations, hand-to-hand combat training, and tactical experience took over. Miguel's gun was in Ray's hands before the younger man realized what happened. What the hell? Santos shouted, reaching for his own weapon. I wouldn't, Ray advised, now holding Miguel's pistol with practiced ease. I'm former Coast Guard Commandant Ray Donovan, and you're all under citizen's arrest for drug trafficking in federal waters. The cartel members looked stunned. Carlos's confidence evaporated as he realized their harmless old fishing captain was actually one of the most experienced drug interdiction officers in Coast Guard history. You're lying, Diego said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Commandant of the 7th Coast Guard District, 1995 to 2010, Ray recited. 15 years overseeing every major drug operation from Texas to Puerto Rico. I've probably arrested more cartel members than you've ever met. Ray kept the pistol trained on them while reaching for his marine radio. And right now, I'm calling in the cavalry. Mayday, mayday, this is charter vessel Sea Angel, position 24 degrees 47 minutes north, 81 degrees 23 minutes west. I have 4 suspects in custody for drug trafficking, requesting immediate Coast Guard assistance. The response came immediately. Sea Angel, this is Coast Guard Station Key West. Confirm you are requesting assistance with drug trafficking suspects. Affirmative, Station Key West. This is former Commandant Ray Donovan. I have visual on drug transfer operation with Go Fast boat still on scene. Even over the radio, Ray could hear the shift in tone. Copy that, Commandant. Cutter forward deployed from your position, ETA 30 minutes. Carlos's face went pale as he realized the magnitude of their situation. They hadn't just tried to use any fishing boat. They'd commandeered a vessel belonging to one of the Coast Guard's most legendary commanders. You don't understand, Carlos said desperately. These people, they will kill us if we don't deliver. Should have thought of that before entering my waters, Ray replied. I spent 30 years protecting these waters from people exactly like you. The Go Fast boat crew, hearing the radio calls, tried to flee. But Ray had already radioed their position, heading, and boat description to the Coast Guard. With his experience, he knew they wouldn't get far. Miguel, Santos, Diego, Ray called each name with authority. Sit down, hands visible. Carlos, you're going to explain to me exactly how this operation works. I don't have to tell you anything. No, you don't, Ray agreed. But I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I already know how it works. The question is whether you want to cooperate now or wait for federal prosecutors to offer you the same deal later. True to Ray's prediction, the Coast Guard cutter arrived in exactly 28 minutes. Ray watched with satisfaction as the familiar white hull with orange stripe approached, the same colors he'd served under for 3 decades. The boarding party was led by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, young enough to be Ray's daughter, but professional enough to handle the situation perfectly. Commandant Donovan, she said, using his retired rank as protocol demanded, we have the Go Fast boat in custody. What's the situation here? 4 suspects, small arms confiscated, evidence of drug transfer operation, Ray reported efficiently. Suspects were using my charter boat as cover for rendezvous with supply vessel. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell couldn't hide her amazement. Sir, how did you... you're supposed to be retired. Ray smiled for the first time in hours. Lieutenant Commander, retirement is a state of mind. The mission never really ends. Over the next 2 hours, the Coast Guard processed the crime scene. The Go Fast boat contained 200 kilograms of pure Colombian cocaine, street value approximately $6 million. Carlos and his team were part of a larger trafficking organization that had been using Key West fishing charters to move drugs from offshore supply ships. They've been operating this way for months, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell explained to Ray. Using legitimate charter boats as cover, we've been trying to figure out their pattern. It's actually brilliant, Ray admitted grudgingly. Fishing boats go out every day. No one suspects them. Perfect cover for rendezvous operations. How did you know? Experience. Their gear was too new. They asked the wrong questions, and they wanted to go to coordinates that screamed drug transfer. Carlos, now in Coast Guard custody, was shaking his head. 30 years, he muttered. 30 years we plan, we study, we prepare, and we choose the boat of the most famous Coast Guard drug fighter in Florida. 31 years, Ray corrected him. I just added 1 more. News of the arrest spread quickly through Key West and then national media. Retired Coast Guard Commandant foils drug operation made headlines, but Ray declined most interview requests. I just want to fish, he told the few reporters he spoke with. This was supposed to be my retirement, but the Coast Guard had other ideas. Admiral Patricia Stevens, current Commandant of the Coast Guard, called Ray personally. Ray, that was outstanding work. We'd like you to consider consulting with us on charter boat security protocols. I'm retired, Admiral. I know. But clearly, retirement doesn't mean the mission ends. Ray looked out at his boat, now returned to normal after being processed as a crime scene. The Sea Angel looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun, just another fishing boat among dozens. What did you have in mind? Word spread through the Key West marina community about what had really happened. Ray's fellow charter captains, who had known him as a quiet, skilled fisherman, suddenly saw him in a new light. Captain Ray, one called out the next morning, heard you had some excitement yesterday. Just fishing, Ray replied, but his smile indicated otherwise. Marina owner Bill Henderson approached him privately. Ray, we had no idea about your background. The Coast Guard said you were some kind of legend. Ancient history, Bill. Maybe. But would you consider doing some security briefings for the other captains? Help us spot these cartel operations? Ray considered. He'd wanted peaceful retirement, but yesterday had reminded him why he'd spent 30 years in the Coast Guard. The mission wasn't really over. It had just changed form. I suppose I could do that. 6 months later, Ray was back to his routine. 5:30 a.m. arrival, equipment check, weather study, tourists. But something had changed. His fellow captains watched for suspicious customers, reported unusual requests, and maintained better communication with Coast Guard stations. Ray had become an unofficial liaison, helping train both charter operators and Coast Guard personnel in recognizing drug trafficking operations. The work was rewarding in a different way than active duty, but just as important. One morning, a new customer approached the Sea Angel, well-dressed, confident, asking about long-distance fishing capabilities. Ray smiled and began asking the right questions. Some habits he'd learned were worth keeping, and so, in the waters off Key West, it was proven once again that retirement from service doesn't mean retirement from purpose. A man who thought his law enforcement days were behind him discovered that the mission never really ends. It just takes different forms. Real guardians are like this. They hang up their uniforms but never abandon their watch. They trade government boats for private charters, but their vigilance remains as sharp as ever. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe stories like this should continue to be told, support Echo Stories by subscribing.